So hello everyone, thank you for joining in. So before we begin with the session, could you all drop in messages in the chat box if my audio is audible and my screen is visible? Thank you. So hi all, good evening. Thank you for joining in the session. I'm really excited to take this session on Flask today. So today we are going to cover the basics of Flask. So just before we begin, I am Nitish Ramaraj from ISTE-VIT Vellore. It is a student-run chapter. So before, let's begin now. So what is Flask? Flask is an open source micro framework written in Python programming language. It is easy to learn and use. What does it mean? It actually means that Flask is a backend framework which is completely written in Python. It is super easy to learn and use. Flask is also beginner friendly. It's because it doesn't have boilerplate code or dependencies. So now when you compare it to some framework like Django, it doesn't force you to use some recommendations like where Django gives you a structure to follow to build your project. But Flask isn't like that. It gives you full freedom and you can build it the way you want. You get more control over Flask application. So why is Flask called as a micro web framework? Flask is called micro because the core features included within it is very small. So say when you compare it to Django, it doesn't have something like an admin page. It doesn't have an inbuilt login feature with it, but it's not that it's not powerful. So now you can make Flask powerful by like downloading pip installing few extensions. Such extensions make Flask equally powerful as other frameworks. Flask is a micro web framework, but it can be made as powerful as any other framework by downloading its extensions. Advantages of Flask. It is definitely an open source framework, so there are like a lot of developers working on Flask. They are pushing new updates. It is becoming more secure and it's making becoming more faster. And Flask, as I told already, it is very lightweight. It comes only with few features, and it makes Flask more convenient. So it also makes Flask in such a way powerful because a new coder who's just into the field can already like start developing, deploy a Flask app. Deploying a Flask app is like super easy and it is super fast. Now, when you compare it to Django, recent studies showed that Flask is like faster than also Django. And as I already told, easy to use. It is very easy to use. So I wanted to give an example why, like, how do you differentiate Flask as a micro web framework? So now I would consider Flask something like, now when you go to a restaurant, there are like two types of menu, like a la carte and buffet system. So micro web framework is something like an a la carte system. So you could like add in whatever you want. Say you go to an a la carte restaurant, you can order what you want and fill in your requirements. So Flask is something like that. Now when you compare to other framework like Django, it's like a buffet system. It comes with all the features. Whether you need it or don't need it, it comes with it. So you eventually end up having it with or without the requirement. So that is the major difference between a micro web framework and the remaining all. So I spoke about the advantages of Flask. So now what are we going to cover today? So today in the remaining say 30 to 40 minutes, so we're going to cover the very basics of Flask, like super quick. Like we're going to cover how to run a server, how to install Flask, and all such basics things are going to be covered today. And also at the end, we're going to build a very small project, say a feedback system CRUD API where all create, read, update, delete, everything, every operation is going to be done. And also we're going to implement a model within this, a very simple module, and we're going to use phpMyAdmin for the SQL GUI. So these are the installation requirements like to go ahead with this session. So we all assume that you all have VS Code installed, Python 3.7 plus installed, Postman and phpMyAdmin. So like these are the very basic requirements to be installed. I will guide you all on how to install Flask and so on. So I hope my VS Code is visible to you all. So this is VS Code. So this is where all pip installs are going to be done. Like we're going to install within through VS Code itself. So there's something called as pip, that is the Python installer packages. So with that, you can install Flask and all its dependencies. So before we begin, it is always suggested to build a virtual environment. So what a virtual environment usually does is it creates a bucket of all your dependencies. So everything in your project is going to go within the bucket. So it's not going to merge with like other projects, like where you have a different dependencies with different versions. So it won't clash with that. So we are going to make a virtual environment really quick now. So the command within the command line to make a virtual environment is this: py3 make, and this is going to get stored in a folder called venv. So now when you click on enter now, it'll internally do all the processing for you to make a bucket. So we need to wait while this is getting done. So you can already see a folder is created here. Now it is waiting, it is downloading all the requirements from there, and like let's wait for the virtual environment to get installed. It's being done, so it also depends on your internet speed and everything like that. So let's wait. You can see some libraries have already been installed, and yeah, so the installation is done now. So you can see everything what is being in within a virtual environment. So now let's get inside the bucket called virtual environment. So the command to get into the virtual environment is the folder name ven, and you can see a scripts folder here. You go into scripts and then activate. So now when you do this, you can see a pop-up green color, this that your virtual environment is activated. So now within this virtual environment, we're going to install Flask. So Flask is a framework, so you just need to install it through this. So pip install Flask. Pip comes with your Python installation, so that is not to worry. So we can see that Flask is getting installed. Yeah. So yeah, Flask is installed now. So now for this project, there are also going to be like some other dependencies. So let us install them also together now itself. So we're going to use pip flask install flask marshmallow. I'll explain what these modules are going to do. Just I thought let's install all of them together. It's the same command, pip install and the name of the library. Next, we need to also install pip flask SQL alchemy. Oh, I think I missed the spelling there. Okay, it's getting installed. And I think finally we need to install one more library, that is MySQL client. So let's wait for this to get installed. Yes, it's installed, and the final library is MySQL client. And yes, we are done with the installation. So maybe we can start with the code, like just start how to give a hello world or something like that, a very basic response from the server. So let's say app.py. So this is going to be the place where we're going to do that. So now let's import the very basic libraries, say from Flask. We need to import Flask. So the Python program links it to it. So import Flask. Yeah, so for running just an hello world or something like that, I think just importing Flask is enough. So now we need to define that app is equal to Flask of underscore underscore. Yeah, so we have defined that, and now let's just give a basic response, say at app.route. So app.route, what it does is, now so you have a domain, say ISTE-VIT.com. So everything after that, whatever you say hello, it'll become like ISTE-VIT hash hello.com. So now just let's keep it simple with the local host, just this app.route. So it's going to be something like a class or diff homepage. Let's return hello world. Yeah, so that's it. So now we just need to give a very the run command. So if underscore name is equal to, so now if we do this during run, the app gets run. So app.run. Let's set debug is equal to true in case if we run into any errors, it will show us the error where we are. And let's say port is equal to the default 55500. Yeah, I think we're done for now. We can run the server. So the command for running this is just like a basic Python. This one, just Python and the name of the file, app.py. Oh, I made a mistake here. It should be double equal to. Save it and run. So you can see your server is running now. So let's shift into the browser and see what happens. So this is going to run in our local host. So now let me get into the browser view. I hope my browser is visible to you all. So now in the browser, it's going to be localhost 550. So this is the port number we gave, and you can see hello world here. So this is the very basic, like you just give a command and hello world, like you can definitely give a HTML template for it and do all other things. So this is how you just start a server, like very basic, like you just started a server and just gave a response. So this can become much more complicated and become into a big website also. So now I think y'all know how to start a server and give a response. So now I think we can start building with the CRUD API that we were supposed to build today. So I'll shift into my VS Code. So I hope my VS Code is back visible to you all. So the server is always running. So now when you kill it, you can just wait for the, yeah, now the server is killed. So now let's start working on the project that we are supposed to build. So importing Flask is just basic of Flask. So now we're going to import request. So request is all the parameters also going to get passed into the application. And JSONify is used to JSON. Like JSON is very used. It's a data type JavaScript object notation. So it is commonly used data representation and transferring data through API. So next we are going to also import Flask SQL Alchemy. So what it does is it is a type of thing which connects your SQL database through this. So you don't need to write SQL commands within a Python code. You can just write it in Python and it gets converted. So I think this is a very powerful tool. And we are going to also use Flask Marshmallow. So Marshmallow is a type, like it is used to give all the data back from the database. It gives you a good structured way of representing data. So let's import Marshmallow. The name sounds good, Marshmallow. And yeah, so now let me show you the database that I've already set up in phpMyAdmin. It gives you a good GUI, like to see how things happen. So let's cut back. Yeah, so this is my browser. So this is how a table is supposed to look. See, now if you look at the structure, it has an ID that is a primary key. So ID is there, name is there, feedback is there, time is there. So ID has an int data type because it's going to be a number for sure, and name has a varchar of the t size, and feedback has varchar of 100, and time has date time. So there are like pre-populated data. So this is how a database would look like. So now what we're going to do is, like, we're going to add a new entry to it. Say now give a new ID, name, and feedback. It'll automatically fill in the time. So, and we're going to create, read it, update it, delete it. So that is the thing we're going to do now. So I hope you just had a gist about the database. So now let's move back into VS Code, and I'll show you how do you do that. So I hope my VS Code is back seen to y'all. Yeah, so we imported all the libraries that are required, I think. So now if something is needed, we'll import it on the go. So now let's initialize the database. So now we are going to use SQL Alchemy and give it the parameters app to let it know. And now we also, let's initialize marshmallow. We're going to use it later, but let's initialize it, marshmallow of app. And let's connect the app to the database, app.config. You'll have to be careful with the spelling. It is SQL Alchemy. I always get it wrong, so I hope it is SQL Alchemy underscore database underscore URI. Yeah, so this is the one, and the link usually used to connect through phpMyAdmin is mysql dot double root, and it is at localhost. So at localhost is nothing but your machine itself, so it's not into any server. And the name of this was feedback. So with this link the database gets connected. So now let's build the model. So it is nothing. Now when you compare it in Python, it's just going to be like some class. You're going to define a class. You just don't have to do anything with SQL. So now let's build a class feedback. So this has to be almost same as the name of the table, and the Python needs to know it's just not a normal class. So what we need to do is put in a db.model to let it know it's just not a regular class, but it's going to use SQL Alchemy into it. Yeah. So first we saw that there was ID, which was a primary key. So it is a db dot column. It is a column of the database. Be careful with the C, it has to be a capital. Yeah, so that has to be a capital. It is an integer data type. It also need to be in capital integer. And yeah, it is a primary key underscore equals to true. Done. So we have defined ID. Now let's define name. Name is also another part of the column, db dot column. So name isn't an integer, it is a string data type. So let's give it string. And we had set a size of 30 because I don't think there will be a name longer than 30. Let's keep it for 30 now. And it is not null, it is a compulsory data type. Like you can't just give in a blank name in a feedback. So you should just keep a nullable true, false. And feedback, this is the where the user feedback gets stored. So db dot column. This is also going to be a string data type, string, and let's give it 100 because feedbacks can be long, and nullable is equal to false. And time, it is db dot column. It is db dot date time. So it is a different data type. It is not an integer. It is a date time data type. Yeah, so date time. So let's give it a default. Like if whatever time this is sent, let's keep that as a date time. So date time dot utc now. Oh, I think we didn't import date time, so it is showing that. Yeah, let's import date time from. Yes, so it's imported, so it won't show that thing for you now, and it's nullable is equal to true because it's anyway going to get filled in automatically. So let's keep nullable equal to true. So that's it for the class definition. So we need a constructor, so let's build on def net self. These are like the very basics of Python, so it has nothing to do with Flask exclusively. Name and feedback. So now, yeah, this is set up. Self.id is equal to id. So this is just a constructor for the class, so it's nothing complicated. Self dot name equals to and self dot feedback is equal to feedback. Yeah, that's it. We are not going to initialize, we are not going to construct time because I felt it, let it get automatically done. We don't need to get an input from that. So now let's build a schema, like a schema for data representation. That's a marshmallow schema. So class feedback schema. So MS stands for marshmallow, which we initialized it already there. So marshmallow.schema, and it's a meta class. Say name is meta class. It is just a default convention used. So you can keep any other name if you want to. Fields. So we have so many fields in this. So it is ID, name, feedback, and the uploaded time. Yeah, so this is the schema. Now let's schema object. So feedback schema for a singular one, feedback schema. So this is for a single feedback. Like now when we are trying to get a data from the database, it's going to be for a single feedback. Now when you're trying to get all the data from the database, let's keep it like, what do you call it? A feedback schema, feedbacks schema, and you give it the same initialize feedback schema, and you'll have to mention mini is equal to true because there is gonna all the feedback. So there's going definitely going to be more than one. So mini is equal to true. So yeah, so this is a basic class definition, like how you initialized a model. So you kept a parameter here saying that it can't be nullable. You said it's a primary key. So basically the database is connected and the database knows that something called SQL is there from the Python file. So it gets connected there. So now we're going to use routes for this. Just because connecting database won't give you anything, you need to perform operations on that. So now let's build a add feedback, like adding a feedback into the database. So let this be the app.route. That is a home page. So now say app.route. So let's name it add feedback because you're going to add a feedback here. So what happens is here after that slash I put add feedback. So before whatever, if there's nothing after the slash, hello world is to come, but now there's a parameter called add feedback. So now if you say ISTE-VIT Vellore.com hash add feedback, this whatever we define inside this happens. So now there was no method. So now here there's going to be a method called post. Method called post is used when you are posting data, like a server understands, okay, there's post like in normal English sending something. There's also a method called getting data from the server. There's something called as put, which is like not post, but it's updating a little bit. So I'll explain about put and get in the next other methods. So now let's define a class. So define, define add feedback, add feedback. So it's up to you. You can keep any other name you want. So now what we're going to do is now the user is going to give us a JSON value. So now let's request for the JSON value. So say you're requesting in the name of feedback metadata. So it's just a conventional name, like you can just write it like feedback data or anything like that, feedback metadata. So now what you're going to do, request. There's so many data is going to come. You're just going to request for a JSON feedback metadata. So we're going to send it in the JSON. From there I'll show it to you in Postman. So feedback metadata. So now we're going to use a new variable called new feedback to put it into the database because it's going to be new for the database. New feedback. So this is the class which we initialized here, feedback. This is the database class, so feedback. And so from the feedback metadata, we're going to need ID. So feedback metadata of ID. Now also we're going to need name, feedback metadata of name, and feedback metadata of, and obviously you need the feedback there, feedback. And yeah, that's it. We are not taking time for now. Time we are just going to make it like automatically. So now we are going to tell the database session dot add, like add it for me, like you're asking the database to add, but you should mention within the bracket what do you want to add. So now you put new feedback, so the database understand, okay, he wants to add this. It gets into the database. So now you commit this, like close it. Now don't add anything else. Close the database, like close the door. So now you commit it. And yeah, so now with this method, hoping everything is without any error, this will work. Now let's just give a return statement, like something happened. So like just give a JSON comment saying that, say what, action is successful. Action is successful. And HTTP status code. So 200 stands for like everything is going good. So let's give it 200 here as well. So yeah, this is the route for add feedback. Let's try running it. I'm just hoping that there is no syntax error or something like that. That's not a problem. We can debug it if even if there is something like that. So let's save it. Okay, let's go. Fingers crossed. App.py. It's running. Yes, so there was no error in this file, luckily. So let me shift you into Postman. So Postman. So I hope Postman is visible to y'all. So now what we are doing is a post request. So we are going to add a feedback. So this is the local host and this is the port number, add feedback. I hope the route name is the same. Let me check. So we gave it as add feedback itself. Yeah, so it is add feedback and let's give a new ID, say something, hoping it's not there, 58, and my name is Nitish Ramaraj, and the feedback is, say, it's good. So feedback, what do you say? I'm happy with this session. And yeah, let's send a request. Yeah, so it says action is successful. So that is what we gave back in the code. So now let's get back into the browser and see if the data got added there. Let's shift you to the browser. So I hope my browser is visible to you. So let's refresh. And yeah, you see my name here. It says that I'm happy with this session. So you can also see the UTC time is taken here. So usually you can give Indian time and convert it, but when you're working in a big product, so having a UTC time is easy to convert from one time to another. So so now you see that the data is added here. So just one part of the CRUD is done. That is C. C stands for create. So now we're going to build read, update, and delete. So I'm just happy that we didn't run into any other bugs while doing this. So now let's go back into VS Code and build the next route. So let's kill the server. Like we don't want it running. It'll run into bug when we're constructing it. So add feedback is done. So next, what do we do? Maybe let's give delete. Delete is a kind of easy one. App.route. So now delete. And delete, you need a id. You can't just you're not going to add a new feedback, so you need a feedback id which is already there. So let's pass it within the url parameter only. So now whenever you put something within this symbol, so it takes it as a parameter. So this parameter is of int data type, so now it's within int, and the method is delete. So there the method we gave was post, as you understood, was sending data. Now this is also easy to understand. Methods, delete matlab it is delete it, you're going to delete something from the database. So it makes the server clear. So now let's define it again. Def delete feedback. So you're going to delete the feedback and you should give this parameter within this, so the next part of the code is able to read it. So feedback, so let's give a variable called feedback. For finding the feedback, you just need to know which feedback are you going to delete, right? So now let's run a query within that class. So we are going to link back to this class itself. So this is everything, every database operation is going to get linked to the rest only. So feedback dot query. Query is a thing that comes within SQL Alchemy. Get is get it from the database by what, using ID. So now when you do this, when you give the ID, it searches within the database if something with this ID is there. So now we get it. So now we tell the database session dot delete it for me. So it's going to get deleted. but then it doesn't know what to delete. So you need to tell this feedback needs to be deleted. So pass it through it, and yeah, it's done. So now close the door. Now we don't want anything else to happen. Close the door, commit it. Yeah, it is done. Now let's return again so that we understand something happened without a response. It is not compulsory, but it's easier to understand for us that something has happened. So let's give it action as successful again itself. Successful. Hoping successful spells right. And 200 okay is the HTTP status code, and 200. So let's see what we did here. So route.delete, we did add feedback here, delete, we gave the parameter ID and method is delete. So we defined it here, passed ID into this, feedback is equal to feedback.query.get ID. So what we did, we found it from the database, we told database delete it, close the door and done. So let's try running this and let's hope like the last time we don't run into any new errors this time. App.py run. It's running. Oh, okay. So VS Code sometimes imports random modules. I don't know why. Okay. So let's kill this. Python app.py. Yes. So we don't have any error. So let's try the delete method. So let's go back into Postman. So fade into Postman. Yeah, so this is Postman. So delete request. So I've already defined it. So the port was 5500. And which ID are we going to delete? So last time we gave an ID 58 as remember. So let's delete 58. So send. Yeah, so it says action is successful. Let's check into the database if actually it got deleted. So let's move into the database. So now you can see there's 58 here. Like because I didn't refresh it, it's there. Now let's refresh it and see if that is gone. Yes, that's gone. So the delete method also successfully worked without a bug. So out of CRUD we did C, D, and now read and update is left. So yeah, let's move into that as well. That is also going to be easy as well. Let's go back into the VS Code, and yeah, now let's build update. Read is gonna be a little tricky, so let's go with update for now. Update and delete is almost similar, like there's no much difference in update and delete, just few methods. Yeah, so at app dot route, so because it's gonna update, let's put update, and like the last time we need to pass that URL parameter for int id. So int ID. So it's similar to the last one, but here the method is going to change. So it is update. So like I told you, it is going to be method called put. So put is what it's going to do is like put, you're not going to post something new. Post is like something completely new you're going to do. Delete is you're deleting it. Put is like you're posting but not fully, like partially, something like that. You're just updating it. It's not new to it, but you're just updating it. So we use a method called put. You can use post and like just try, but let's use put method. Yeah, so now let's define this as well. So it's going to be update feedback. So same, you need to pass the ID through this, so it's seen throughout the code. And now yeah, so let's request for feedback metadata like that time. So now we are, it's similar to adding data. See, now we are going to request same in this way. Let me just copy this line because it's the same thing, paste it, feedback metadata, you're requesting for it. Now in this request, we just going to like whatever we get, we're going to put it into the database. We are not going to do anything like it. We know that it came and we just going to put it back. So feedback is equal to feedback dot. So now we need to know which feedback we're going to update. We can't just go and update some random feedback. So query dot get query.get id. So the id from here is going to get passed. So the id which we pass through the url, with that id it's going to find the feedback. Now with that feedback, now you found that feedback, now you can change the id. So before, if you gave it 50, now you can make it 60. So we are updating it. Feedback.id is equal to feedback metadata. So that's what we defined. Yeah, feedback metadata of id. So you get id here and you find id. Now feedback dot name, say, because we had name also in that, feedback dot name, feedback metadata of name. And let's update the feedback as well. Say a customer liked it before, now he doesn't. So let's update it as well. Feedback. A lot of typing. Yeah. Feedback metadata of feedback. So yeah, so now what we did is we requested data and now we are giving it like whatever was there earlier, just replace it with this. Even if the same thing comes, just replace it. That's what we are trying to do. Now let's tell the DB to commit, like that's it, done. We are done with this. That's all we got to do now. So now we commit this and let's return it, return something, say action is successful. That's the same thing. Yeah. Action is successful. Hope I spelled it right. And the same HTTP code 200. Okay. And here let's give 200. Let me show what this 200 is. So yeah, so we understood what happens here. Let's save it and try running it, hoping there's no error again. Python app.py. It's running. Okay, so this thing got imported again. So what happens is now when we write methods here, VS Code assumes that we need that module, but later it realizes, oh, already Flask has it, so it's not required now. Python app.py. Yeah, so server is running. So again, luckily there is no error. Is there? Yeah, let's go into Postman. So this is the Postman. So now what we did was an update thing. So let me check which ID already exists. So there is an ID at 99 Johnson. So 99 Johnson is there. So we're going to pass ID 99. Now let's make his ID something like 109, and instead of Johnson, let's make him Michael. And what do you say? IST is a very good chapter. Very good chapter. And now let's try sending this. And this is a put request. So you need to change it into put and send. Could not send. Okay, this is my port number isn't right. So 5500. Action is successful. So let's see what happened within the database there. So go back to pgAdmin. Fade. I think you can see pgAdmin now. And see, now you can see that Johnson is there. He's saying this is super cool, updated. Now let's change it all. So you see his ID itself change. Michael says, and also Michael says IST is a very good chapter. Definitely it is. So I think now we've completed CUD, which is create, update, and delete. So now read. So read is going to use Marshmallow because you're going to use. Wait, let me shift back to VS Code. VS Code, fade back in. Yes, so we're back in VS Code. Okay, so now let's define read. So it's going to be the same thing, app.route. You can just give a route to it. Now let's say what do we name it? So let's keep it feedbacks, and this method is a get. So what we going to do with this link is, give me a minute. Yeah, get. So with this route, what we are trying to do is get all the feedbacks in the database. Like if there are 10 feedbacks, get everything. So now with this route, we are trying to get only a feedback with that particular ID. So now say feedbacks of int ID, the same parameter int ID. And so with this method, what we're trying to do is get only a particular feedback with that ID. Say with 109 there was Johnson, Michael. Just get his feedback for me, not all. So we're going to use the same, like we don't need to define a new method for that. It's almost the same. It's just that one versus all. So we are not going to try to keep it within one definition. So we don't have to write route separate, define it separately, and do it again. We are going to combine this together. So now what we're going to do is diff view feedback of ID. So now the thing which when compared to update and here, what are the differences? Here you definitely know there's some ID is going to come here, but here there's no ID going to come because you want everything. So just let's initialize it to 0. you know, because id is a primary key, it can't be 0. So let's initialize it to 0. So now if id is 0, if id is equal to 0, what it means is that you obviously didn't give any id with that url, this one. So it obviously means that you want all the feedbacks. So now let's get all the feedback for you. So feedbacks equal to feedback link back to that class query dot all. So now we are querying all, like get everything to me. I don't care like which ID, whoever gave it, get it all for me. Now all feedbacks should be sent. Like just getting it is not enough. You need to send it back in a JSON format. So you get all feedbacks and use the feedback schema which we used before, feedback schema dot dump of feedbacks. So what happens now is with that schema which we defined here, the marshmallow schema, it gives it in the form of ID name. It's just like a label ID name feedback. It gets the data and dumps it into that this one. And yeah, that's it. Now we're done with this method. So just return JSONify of all feedback. So it'll be in a format where id. So in this you see that we've given a feedback id name feedback uploaded time. So in that format it gives back you all the feedbacks. So now we have also another method. So if id is not equal to 0, it means that you want to get a particular feedback. So now let's get that particular feedback is equal to, it's not feedback, it is feedback. So get by that id. So we did that for delete update methods. You get by one id. So let's get that feedback by that id dot get of id. So we got it. So now what happens is it gets pulled from the database. So now we need to send it back in a defined way. You just can't send in an unorganized way. Only if it's organized you can get back the data, it's readable. So we use marshmallow there. So now with now you need to return back it. So return in a json format itself. So feedback schema dot jsonify of the feedback. So there we give feedback schema. So this means there we had defined that many is equal to true. See, we give feedback schema is equal to many is equal to true, but here it's just a feedback schema because it's just going to be a single feedback. So single feedback JSONify of what is the variable gave, yeah, feedback. So we just need to put in feedback. So with this, what happens is the marshmallow gives back a JSON in an organized way with all the feedbacks from pulled from the database. So I think this method is a little tricky and when compared to other methods, but it's not complicated. So what we did was use two routes. One is for feedbacks and feedbacks with the parameter. One is get used to get all the feedbacks and one is just to get one feedback. And now with view feedback id is equal to 0, we just initialized id in case id is not coming. Then you know it, you're going to get all the feedbacks, tell the database hey I want everything, and you dump it into the schema and it returns json. So that is id when you have to get all the feedbacks. Otherwise I give you an id say 105. So with 105 you tell hey database I just want this feedback with this id. So once it gets it, it'll return back that that feedback with that marshmallow schema. So I think this is the read method. It is a little difficult, but it is not complicated. It is a little logic. So now let's save it and run this. Let's hope like the last time, no error. Let's see if the same module got imported. Yeah, CVS Code has imported it again. Luckily we saw it, otherwise it'll give us an error again. And now with app.py, run it, hope no error. And yes, there's no error this time as well. So let's just quickly get back into postman and see what postman has to say if we have any error or into this. So yeah, so postman is here. So the port number is 5500, feedbacks off. So last time we sent a feedback that IST is a good chapter with ID 109. So let's get that first. 109. So you see the feedback here. IST is a very good chapter. ID is 109 and name is Michael. So what happened now is, I'll just quickly jump back into VS Code. So now what happened is we didn't give an URL we didn't give an id parameter within the url. So what happened was it got into this, it got into, we gave an parameter, so it got into this and got, hey, told database, hey, find this id for me and return it. And marshmallow did the other work, like giving back in a structured syntax, so you see it is with the label, so it's easy to read. So next time if you're passing this api to say a new person, he knows, oh, this is the feedback, this is the id, this is the name. So now let's do one more method to get all the feedbacks in the database. So this is going to be cool. Let's make this big and yeah, send it. Wow, that's nice. You see how neat it is back. You see all the feedbacks there. So you see Andrew says this is super cool. Benjamin saying good interface, and Michael says IST is a very good chapter again. So this is getting all the feedback. So here what happened was we didn't give any ID parameter here. It went to the if id is equal to 0 and found all the parameters. So I was telling you, you need to pass 200, okay, 200, okay. So here because you pass that thing, it shows 200, okay. So it lets the server know everything's happening as per plan, you don't need to worry. So let's jump back into VS Code and see it again. So this is the entire CRUD API. This is a very basic CRUD API, like a very basic. So you just included the model and all the routes within it. You included all the routes within it. And usually this is not the way we build a web app. Like we need to keep it more structured, because here we have limited routes, it's okay. Usually what we do is structure it in such a way called models, view, control. So that is called as a MVC architecture. So what happens there is we have a separate file for model, like how we have app, we'll have a separate file for model, and we'll have a separate file folder or file for views is where the HTML beautifying happens. So what you see, you don't see a JSON value, you see all in a beautiful HTML way, say it's a React or just basic HTML, CSS. That's how you see. And controllers is where all these go. So this is where all the controllers go. You'll have all the methods here. So it becomes easy to maintain. You know, if there's a problem with the model, you don't have to search 100 lines. Where is your model? Where is your route and stuff? So easy, split it and build it like that. So that's it, Flask. Now, just because this was Flask, we could do it in such a way. If it was Django, we'll have to listen to its requirements, follow it, and what it says. Just because it was Flask, we just built it super quick. Like we build a big CRUD API in like no time. We linked it to a database and did all the operations. So yeah, that's it for the project. I hope you all understood it, and hope it was easy and it was also fun building it. I think it is a very basic API, but this is like the fundamental for you to get into Flask. So yeah, if there are any doubts, you could post into the post into the chat box. Like we can wind up the session else. So this is about me. I am Nitish Ramaraj, and as I told, I am from ISTE-VIT Vellore. It is a student chapter. I am representing it. So at IST, we conduct so many more sessions like this. We have interactive webinars and like that. And if you had any doubt regarding this session, you could connect with me on LinkedIn or catch up or ping me on LinkedIn and get any doubts or anything related to web dev clarified. So that's it for the session. I hope you all had a great time. I had a really great time conducting this session to you all. I definitely recommend you all following IST on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and check out our GitHub on IST. We have like so many superb projects there. And also don't forget to subscribe to ISTE-VIT a YouTube channel. Like it keeps you updated if there is new webinars coming up or not. So we have more webinars coming, like from the domain machine learning, competitive programming. We also have blockchain and many more. Like I recommend you all stay updated with the YouTube channel. And yeah, finally, I hope you all liked it. And thank you so much all like for joining into the session. I hope you all had a great time. And yeah, that's a bye bye for me. Bye bye.